I was reminded this is a kind of a funny little joke before we begin with the prayer. Has nothing to do with the Bible study, but I know that many of you were saddened by the game on Saturday when it was very close. But hold on now, because here is a good story, a good ending of the Texas-Alabama rivalry from years ago. I don't know if it's a true story, but as a friend of mine used to say, never let the truth get in the way of a good story, right? So apparently in the 1965 Orange Bowl between Texas and Alabama, it was a close game. And at the very end of the game, the last play of the game, Joe Namath, the Alabama quarterback, was stopped just short of the goal line, and they lost the game. And so the old coach, Bear Bryant, was walking off the field, and he was growling at the referee, and he said, "Are you sure that my boy did not get into the end zone?" And the referee said, "Coach, he did not. He missed it by this much." Now, aren't you glad you heard that story after the result from Saturday? Does that make you feel better? Okay. Like I said, if it wasn't a true story, it should be, right?
It should be.
And there's more like that. But after, we'll wait. If you want to have another funny story, I'll let you know after the class. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you and we praise you for this day, the day that you have made for us to rejoice and to be glad in and to come together as a community to study your word. Teach us, we pray, new truths, old truths that may even encourage us in our life and ministry. And all this to your honor and glory, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So I want to welcome those of you who were here last time and any new faces, and especially those who are Zooming live. And I was told that beginning on the Monday after the class, the recordings of this class will be up on the website. And I checked it out. It's really easy to access. So if you miss a class, no worries. You can catch it on the following Monday. Just get caught up. And I think that's kind of helpful simply because, as I mentioned last week, a lot of this class are really building blocks. And so, for example, last week we introduced this phrase of the righteousness of God, and today we're going to spend more time and flesh out what that phrase means in Paul's theology. So that'll be helpful. I think I wanted today to talk about a portion of Paul's preaching early in Romans that is not always easy to hear. And that is this whole idea about sin and the power of sin. The reason Paul spends a lot of time on that is he wants to make sure that we understand sin, I call with a capital S, not little sins, small, plural, in order for us to understand the true power of love and mercy of God. And like all biblical writers, and especially even in the Old Testament, this idea of the wrath of God, the sinful nature of humanity always needs to be taught, and we need to be reminded that it's always taught in the context of love and mercy. And for Paul, that would have been the gift and the power of the cross. Okay, so that's sort of our overall theme today. And that's why you'll see, just to kind of look at our outline today, I wanted to begin specifically with a verse that stands by itself, chapter 1, verse 18, because that is the opening verse where he talks about this thread of the power of sin, the sinful condition of humankind. And it goes all the way to Romans chapter 3, verse 21, but now. That's a key phrase where his subject then changes, and he gets off that topic and does other things, okay? So that's really why I wanted to begin. I like this phrase. In a minute, we'll look at chapter 1, verse 18, but I like this phrase, and I talked about it a little bit last week, there is no distinction. That was a favorite phrase of Paul, and he uses it in some of his other letters. Last week, that phrase, there is no distinction, he used to say that everyone has access to the grace of God. It's not just for the chosen people or for anyone who may be in or out, but it's for all. Today, he talks about there is no distinction in the context of no one is exempt from sin. No one is exempt from the power of sin. And how Paul does this is typical Paul. He's so clever. He always likes to draw his readers into thinking that he's really talking about someone else, okay? I'm not talking about you, about me, but I'm talking about describing someone else. And I think, of course, if you think about that, that is typical human behavior. Because if we hear something unflattering being said, we would like to think that it is being said about someone else or some other group. And so that's why chapter 3, verse 22, we're going to spend a lot of time on that phrase, no distinction. So by way, just to finish up this intro, what does that phrase in Paul's mind and also in ours, no distinction, really mean? It levels the playing field. It is no special recognition. It means no advanced placement. It means no inner circle. There is no distinction. And so he is talking about this whole idea of universal human sinfulness going way back to the days of Adam and Eve. And that's why I wanted to begin chapter 1, verse 18 with the conversation today. Again, understanding that this wrath of God, this fear of God, this anger of God is always enclosed and a part of the love and the mercy of God. So if you would turn over, you'll see the 3 different scriptures we're going to look at today in order, beginning with just a single verse, Romans chapter 1, verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and wickedness of men who by their wickedness suppress the truth. Now, you're probably thinking, I could have done well today without reading this verse. Right? Well, it's a wonderful way to begin Thursday morning here at the church house. But again, remember, stay with me. This is part of the overall theology. Paul never, ever, ever teaches good news without offering the bad. And we just have to, as good biblical students, understand that and seek that out. So let's look at that, because you can tell in the severity of that one verse that for Paul, the wrath of God is very real. But it also, its aim, the aim of the wrath of God is in reality the opposite of sin. And here's what I mean by that, because you and I have to understand that all biblical writers, including Paul, had the wrath of God, as I mentioned, in the context of a gospel message. And I think that's really difficult for us to understand because we shut down often when we hear about sin. We're thinking, oh gosh, here's judgment again. Here is this, what I've done wrong. I didn't come here this morning or to hear a sermon on this or that. And I think if we feel that, it's because we don't understand often the context of the wrath of God in the context of faith and hope. And I think it might help us then to remind ourselves of the starting point when we talk about sin. So I like to talk about it in this way. This is helpful for me. Hopefully it will be for you. When we think of sin, we think, as I mentioned, plural with a small s, sins. And then there is sin with a capital S and a capital I and a capital N, okay? Now we tend to think of sins as a bunch of transgressions. You know, we've done this, this, and this, and we have neglected to do this, this, and this. And surely the add up those transgressions and we have sin. Well, that's just part of it. We have to dig deeper, because sin is really a condition of rebellion against God. It is when we place ourselves often in the place of God, and we think we can do this better ourselves. Yes, we are always responsible to others and to God for sins, any sins that are committed, and yet we also need to remind ourselves that we are completely unable to liberate ourselves from its grip. We try to do it ourselves. We are desperate if we go down that road. I came across a quote I really like from the late Catholic theologian Dorothy Sayers. She says, quote, "Sin is, quote, deep interior dislocation in the very center of human personality." I mean, that is desperation. Deep interior dislocation in the very center of human personality. God hates sin in any form, but we also know that he never hates the sinner. He never hates the person. And so to be a Christian, I think, is to understand this and to know this, to know that there is always available the gift of God's grace that has to be included and understood in any conversation about sin, the gift of forgiveness. And yet we know that, we all know that. We have been around enough, we have a faith that is strong enough to understand that, but still we also know the enormity of human resistance to that grace. And to pay the price and to understand that God paid an incredible price for us to overcome this resistance when he placed Jesus on the cross. We need to know the facts of our condition. And really, that begins in the doctrine of original sin. It's real, going all the way back to Adam. The Old Testament writers, the prophets, they certainly talked about that. Jesus, the New Testament writers. And so now I hope we have a better understanding of how important it was for Paul to use this phrase repeatedly, there are no distinctions. Okay? So let's look at that second paragraph. This is where he really gets into the heart of the matter for us to understand the power and the grip of sin. What then? Are we Jews any better off? No, not at all. For I have already charged that all men, both Jews and Greek, are under the power of sin. As it is written, none is righteous, no, not one. No one understands, no one seeks for God. All have turned aside. Together they have gone wrong. No one does good, not even one. So the context is important here. Let's talk about that. The Gentiles were regarded at this time as the foreigners, as the strangers, as people who are not of our kind. The Jews, in the context of Paul's world, would have been the in-group, right? The religious aristocracy, the Episcopalians, if you will. The Jews are, so first the Gentiles. Why do you think the Gentiles would stand under the judgment of God, as Paul has decided, is written? really because of nothing more than their ignorance, their godlessness. They did not know any better. That's why it was Paul who was assigned to be the apostle to the Gentiles, to do all of this teaching. He was the great teacher, more so than Peter, you see. Then he turns to the Jewish Christians, those who are new to the faith, that came from the Jewish faith, who in many places were still very proud of their standing. Demonstrating that they too, because of their arrogance, are deserving of the wrath of God. In condemning others, many Jewish Christians at this time have presumed to place themselves above any condemnation. And I think that when we look at this in the context of our life and ministry, we've probably been in both places. And I think one of the greatest gifts, and I've had many conversations with people about this, one of the greatest gifts of the Holy Spirit of God is when the Holy Spirit on occasion convicts us of our sin. Because we need that. There is sometimes no other way to get through Mike Wyckoff's very thick skull until the Holy Spirit enters in and convicts me of our sin. And I believe that the Holy Spirit is sometimes, in this case, working the grace of God. I'm going to give you a wonderful quote that a friend of mine, a wonderful bishop, Deborah, one of your dad's best friends, Fitzsimmons Allison, said. He goes, why is it that I can identify the sin in someone else so much better than I can identify the sin in myself? That's honest, right? And isn't that true? It is for me, right? As some of you know, just a quick excursus, but on this topic. For 8 years, my daughter has lived in Washington, D.C., and Martha and I made an average of 2 trips per annum. So we were up in D.C. 15, 16 times for a number of years. And we must have visited the Lincoln Memorial about 5 or 6 of those times. I never got tired of that. And I especially love to read his writings, which are etched on all of the walls around the Lincoln Memorial. And I have really discovered that I believe Abraham Lincoln was a very, very good theologian. We don't think of that. I mean, he's a great president, but he was a very astute theologian. And he knew his Bible very well. And even as a young man, he said he was very moved by the early Presbyterian preachers of his life when he grew up in Kentucky. He obviously knew the Psalms and all of the prophets, and that's the sort of background of his great writings. But here's the point I want to make with you. Lincoln consistently was saying that both the North and the South were to blame. Both the North and the South needed forgiveness. Both the North and the North could not claim victorious side, even though they won the Civil War, because they were all of the same country. In other words, he was saying none is without sin. Both must forgive. And as I take that message in my lifetime, I got to tell you, I don't hear a lot of presidents of both sides saying that. I don't hear a lot of politicians on both sides of the aisle saying that. There is something about sin that reminds us that if we get to a point where one is victorious and one's a loser, we've missed the whole point. And Lincoln did not miss the whole point. And if we look at some of the conversations of public discourse, I think we would do well as a country if we could remember the wisdom of Abraham Lincoln. Back to the topic here. I want us to look at one of the the favorite phrases that Paul uses in addition to looking at no distinctions. He also likes to talk about looking at the line between good and evil. It's a fine line, and it's one that he wants us to understand. And for me, to look at this, I always am reminded of the confessions, the various forms of confessions that we have in the Book of Common Prayer and that we read every Sunday. And I'm particularly always been drawn to the older versions, the Right One versions. Phrases like, you'll remember this, erred and strayed from thy ways like lost sheep. That says it beautifully, right? You don't remember that? Or how about this one? Following the devices and desires of our own hearts, right? Now we say that, and yet we've memorized that. They're really, aren't they, Francis? They're deep in our soul. They really are. But oftentimes we still are in denial when it comes to understanding what they mean. I mean, if only Mike would admit to the fact that he has said this and done this, he would finally understand the gift of forgiveness. He would be better off if only Mike would just let go of some of his anger. You see, he would allow for the gifts of the Holy Spirit to move in and to heal him, you see. This is what I mean when I talk about the line between good and evil that runs through each person, all of us. And the tragedy, you see, is not to see it in oneself. The harm, the one who causes the harm against another person, against ourselves, and yet never repents of it. The one who never admits to the sin to himself even. And the tragedy, you see, and this is what Paul, I think, is teaching us here, is that that person is then blocked from receiving the promise of the gospel. That person is blocked from receiving the grace of forgiveness. No grace can enter when we are in denial. And in a moment, I'm going to stop and pause so we can have a conversation. But this last point, I think, is really interesting to me, and I didn't kind of discover this until studying recently. But you might be interested that Paul rarely uses the word forgiveness. No, rather, he likes to use the word justification. And so the question is why? Why is that? Because in Paul's theology, justification means that we sinners, right, all of us, will not only be forgiven, we will also be justified, which means we will be set right with the power of God. That's even more than just forgiveness offers. It's the whole package, at least in Paul's thinking. And we want to look at, so if justification is more than just forgiveness, how does that work? And we're going to read on in a moment. But let me just pause right there because I've kind of said a lot. Any thoughts, any comments so far? Please.
My feeling about the word justification is different.
Oh, please.
It is that this is justified, this is okay. It's
Okay.
the facts that say this is good. And I can't get from there to forgiveness.
Yeah. So thank you. That is, you're right. That the ways that word is used now is a lot different than in the biblical writing. So when Paul uses justification, in his mind, and others would say this too, it is the fact that we have been justified, meaning made right, because of what happened on the cross. And we're going to talk about that at the very end of the class. The gifts and the meaning, the opportunities given to us by Jesus' sacrificial death on the cross means that we are justified to receive all of the gifts of grace. It's like a transaction. But you're right. I mean, it's a different meaning in everyday English language now. It is. The reformers were really the ones. Martin Luther, for example, was really one who used justification a lot and understood Paul well in that context. Okay.
Sometimes I wonder how
Yes.
many times I need to be justified.
Well, I mean, that's our humanness speaking, isn't it? That's right. I mean, in other words, that's a way of saying, Francis, if I could, I don't want to put words in your mouth. It's like, okay, Jesus died on the cross for me, therefore I'm justified, but I need for him to die on the cross again, and again, and again, and again. Do you see the trap we get into? I don't know if that's your experience, but I think that could, we take that, extend it out, and that's what happens. No, he died on the cross once and for all. He doesn't need to die again.
But we still need to ask for forgiveness.
Yes. Oh, of course. I guess Paul is saying that forgiveness is just part of the gift of what happened on the cross. There's so much more, and that's why we say in the confession or some of the forms of confession, now go and sin no more. You've been rid of that. Please, yeah.
Is it fair to think of that distinction in presence and absence of limited time? I mean, this is for an engineer, I think,
Yeah,
terms like that. But it almost seems to me like the concept of forgiveness is an action, whereas the concept of justification is a state.
Mm-hmm. Well, I like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, forgiveness is an act.
We don't ask in the
Mhm.
prayers to be justified, but we do ask every
Mhm.
week to
Yeah.
be forgiven, every day
Yeah.
to be forgiven.
Right.
But Jesus died once for justification, so we are in a
Right.
state of justification.
Mhm.
Yet by faith we just go and accept it.
That's helpful to me. Yes, I like that.
Correct
Mhm.
perception of that?
Yeah. That's helpful to me. We ask for forgiveness every time we have sinned against God or someone else, and we should, but we are still justified. That doesn't go away, which allows us to forgive. It's helpful to me. Good. Okay.
There was a time in my life that I had a lot of anger towards a certain person. And of course, I felt justified in that.
Yeah.
However, through my mother keep trying to tell me, you gotta let go. And I finally did at a very precise time when I felt it, not knowing that I was gonna do that. But the feeling after that of letting go of the anger and the feeling justified was so freeing and uplifting. But it took so long to do the forgiveness.
There's a lot down there.
It was.
Yeah. And your story is really important for us to hear, because a lot of times we are asked to forgive someone who's no longer alive. The healing of the past, the healing of memories, the healing of a person who's no longer in our midst. How does that work? You see?
Sure.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it just brought me to new life after that. It was the most exhilarating feeling I've ever felt at that time.
Yeah.
I've had several since.
Good. Thank you for that reminder.
Well, one other thing, and thinking along those lines is that from the words of the Lord's Prayer, it's almost like, forgiveness, if I forgive someone, it's not for that person's benefit, it's for my benefit.
Yeah.
To offer forgiveness.
For your soul, for your renewal, for your ministry, right? Yeah. Good. This is wonderful to hear. I appreciate this. Yeah. Okay. So there's a huge shift in Paul's teaching. It begins in verse 21. But now. So let me just, before I read that paragraph, let me just not warn everyone, let me alert everyone. Whenever you hear a phrase, but now, or therefore, pay close attention. By any biblical, pay close attention. We are talking about a dramatic shift here, a big pivot. But now, the righteousness of God has been manifested apart from law. Although the law and the prophets bear witness to it, the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all who believe. For there is no distinction, since all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. They are justified by his grace as a gift through the redemption. Circle that word redemption, we're going to return to that. Through the redemption which is in Christ Jesus, whom God put forward as an expiation by his blood to be received by faith. This was to show God's righteousness, because in his divine forbearance, he had passed over former sins. It was to prove at the present time that he himself is righteous and that he justifies him who has faith in Jesus. So there's a lot there, but we have some time to go through it. As I mentioned, but now is that great pivot in his teaching on sin to righteousness, between death, which sin leads to, versus life, which forgiveness and righteousness leads to. It's transformative statements. So as I mentioned, also always pay attention to words like this, because what they do is they herald the coming of the gospel. Always, without exception, the good news is to follow phrases like now, but now, therefore. Martin Luther, who we all know enough about his story to know that we thank him for being the first great reformer that ushered in the Protestant Reformation. There were others, John Calvin, our own Church of England background would have been Thomas Cranmer, but it was really Martin Luther that did the most. And by the way, one of the first books, I was still here when I read it, because I remember it was, maybe I'd retired, at the 500th anniversary of the birth of Martin Luther. Eric Matejas wrote a wonderful biography called Luther. And I really enjoyed it, because I kind of hadn't done much Luther work since seminary, and it was really a wonderful biography. And we all know him to be a guy who had all kinds of pressures he put on himself. He was always in angst. He was a brilliant young Catholic priest who was going to do great things, a great teacher, a great writer, but he really struggled in his private life to understand the grace of God. He was still kind of caught up in works, and he just had some blind spots. And he would see all kinds of bishops to counsel him and spiritual directors of the day, and nothing seemed to work until this one moment came where a light bulb came in on his study, and it was this verse, but now. And he's, as a student, a good student of Romans, he saw, as we see, that phrase, but now, changes the whole trajectory of the letter. And it was an incredible aha moment for Martin Luther. So hold on. I remember in that wonderful hymn that he wrote, that we all love. We sing it maybe more at funerals than anywhere else. I'm sure Don sings it, has to sing it from time to time. Remember how mighty fortress is our God? Remember that? So he wrote that. And listen to verse 3. Listen to verse 3 with me. And though this world with devils filled should threaten to undo us, we will not fear, for God hath willed his truth to triumph through us. And then here's the phrase, the prince of darkness grim, we tremble not for him. His rage we can endure, for lo, his doom is sure, one little word shall fell him. And we don't know what that one little word is. It could be Jesus. Sorry? It could be Jesus, it could be anything, but it could be also be, but now. I mean, that could be what that one little word was. But I just think that's a wonderful verse that I've always enjoyed when I sing that hymn. Not sure what it is, but it could be. I wanted you to, maybe as a way to look at, to kind of uncover a meaning in this paragraph, is for us to look at that word redemption. It's a new word that Paul is introducing in his letter, and it's an important word. So let me just sort of ask, what does the word redeem mean to you?
Forgiveness.
Forgiveness? Mm-hmm.
Not as an age of ladies'
Okay. any
That really shows how religion.
y'all are getting at it, getting at the edges of the meaning. Good. Anybody else? What is the word redeem? Restoration? Yes. Oh, that's good.
Restoration is something that was good.
Yes. Right.
I think it means to cash in.
Yes. Right. Right.
For the
Yeah.
supermarket.
Yeah. Thank you. I think all of this really is a wonderful points. Redemption, or to redeem, really means to pay a price in order to bring it back, in order to get it back. And this is what God has done. He has paid the ultimate price in placing his own son on the cross in order to bring his world back to him. Okay? That's a very, I think that makes sense to us. And here, it's really important to remind ourselves that all of this previous verses on the unrighteousness of man is really no match for the righteousness of God. That's how bold this is, and that's what he is saying. And I want you to think about that for just a moment. The unrighteousness of humanity is no match for the righteousness of God. Think about that, because it's really incredible. It tells me that the righteousness of God calls servants like you and me to himself, and then he goes about the business of making us righteous, you see. We are not born righteous. We are born in original sin. We are less than godly. We have ungodly thoughts, actions, blah, blah, blah. But that's okay, because God's business more than anything else is to make us his, to make every servant his. And I think for me, I'm always fascinated, especially by people in the public sphere, whether it's entertainment, whether it's politics, whether it's business, law, whatever. But to me, you see that when people risk their careers, their livelihood, to tell the truth. You see, there are examples of that all the time. That to me is God making everyday servants righteous people. the righteousness of God means that God has given us a new law that is written on our hearts, a law that does not condemn, but a law that saves. The righteousness of God means that God is always acting, just as he acted when he departed the Red Sea, just as he acted when he breathed spirit in those dry bones, when the trumpet sounds, when the dead are raised. The righteousness of God means that God will call into existence those things that did not exist before, like peace in the Ukraine, where there was war, like love between two people where before there was hate. That's righteousness. Where truth when before there was only lies. I think this becomes really the final goal and aim that Paul has for us, that not even the wrath of God, the anger of God can condemn us because we have the gift of the cross of Christ. And it was God who has made that so. It's as if God has absorbed the wrath and the anger of God, absorbed it, and made it righteous, and made us righteous. Redemption, then, is a word that gives light, illuminates righteousness, because redemption, the death of Jesus on the cross, is sort of like a great switch, a light switch. It's a transferal. It's something that wasn't there before but is now. Okay?
So he's speaking to he's speaking to the Jews and the Gentiles.
Yes, and to us.
It has to do with the law of Abraham's law and tying it in as a covenant with the covenant with Jesus Christ.
Right,
And
right. And actually we're going to talk in 2 weeks when we return, chapter 4, he goes even more detail. He talks about Abraham, the role of Abraham and the covenant in this new law of righteousness, this new gift of grace of righteousness. Paul is a wonderful scholar, and he's introducing this exact topic here, but he's going to really go into depth in chapter 4. And we see Paul, the Old Testament scholar that he is. But you're right. It's just like when we remember our lesson last year when we talked about Jeremiah 31. There is a new law written, the covenant, a new covenant that's written. The old one is old, and here's the new one, anticipating Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. We all need, everyone needs this new covenant, this new righteousness, this new spirit, this new law. And to understand it is to understand fully what Jesus did for us on the cross, which is what I want us to talk about next. But any questions about this paragraph so far? Okay. So I think one of the most difficult questions in my ministry I've dealt with is this is generally speaking, is who does God think he is by doing what he did? How does that work? That the God having the death of Jesus on the cross changing everything, even more basic. What exactly has God done for us through the death of Jesus on the cross? Now, that's a full answer, and in many of his letters, he talks about that. But in this particular 2 verses, he gives us 3 very distinctive gifts that the death of Jesus on the cross means. And this is one of those parts of his letter where I wish he had a better editor because it is kind of a long verse, couple of verses. But I want us to unpack it and talk about what I see are 3 things in chapter 25, in verse 25, that reveal what the cross means to us. So let's look at that verse 25. I think it's worth really deciphering closely. Whom God put forward as an expiation by his blood to be received by faith. This was to show God's righteousness, because in his divine forbearance, he had passed over former sins. So there are three things there. First, redemption of sinners, and we'll talk more about that. Two, there's the gift of a sacrifice, or what we call an atonement, where Jesus substitutes Jesus for everyone else on the cross. And number three, there is a demonstration, what happened on the cross, there's a demonstration of his justice. So let's look at that. First of all, the cross redeems us because God has brought us out of our captivity, out of our sin, simply by shedding the blood of his son, Jesus, on the cross. That's what when he says the phrase, the expiation by his blood. You've heard the phrase, the power of the blood of Jesus. There's a wonderful old spiritual hymn. How does that go, Michael? Let's think of it.
Power in
The blood, power in the blood. And that's there is power in the blood of Jesus. That's the ransom we were talking about, the redemption. Second, the cross is the act of sacrifice, sometimes called the propitiation, the atonement, where Jesus dies for us. That's why when we talk about various theories of atonement, the most important theory, the one that's most accurate, is what's called the substitutionary theory of atonement, where Jesus is the substitute for us all. Okay? And third, the cross is the demonstration of the victory, finally, that God has over sin once and for all. It is the vindication of our common humanity, the recognition that we are justified. Okay, so those right there in those verses, 24, 25, 26, are at least three of the gifts that we've been given by virtue of Jesus dying on the cross. It redeems us. It is the act of sacrifice, the atonement, and third, the demonstration of the victory of God. One last thing, and that is verse 26 is worth looking at one more time. It was to prove at the present time that he himself is righteous and he justifies him who has faith in Jesus. Now, what struck me about that word is that we are called to receive what this grace offers. It's been given to us and we have to take it, right? We have to receive it. If there's no distinction here, it's for everyone. And when I think of this whole paragraph I've just read to you, and the constant invitation all the time to receive this grace of righteousness, of justification, of salvation, I think of the fact that this is brilliant and that we really owe a debt to Paul for explaining it to us. Because at the end of the day, there is no other religious philosophy. There is no other system like it. And its genius and its uniqueness is that the help given to us is from outside of ourselves. We can't do it. You know, we cannot do it in the sense that we can achieve it, earn it. No, it's given to us, and we just have to accept it. Grace is finally a gift to be received. I hope we never forget that or take it for granted. or think we are outside of it, or that we're not eligible for it, or because of some distinction, we don't get it. We have a few moments before we end with prayer. Is there any comments so far about St. Paul's earlier chapters here in his letter to the Romans? Okay. Good. So just a couple of reminders, and then we'll have some time for prayer. When we have prayer, I would invite the petitions of you to be lifted up as well. I don't feel I need to be a spokesman for the different petitions. So we can have that together. So next week, as I mentioned, I won't be here, but the church will be restarting the Eucharist at 10 o'clock. And so Ann McLemore will be the priest that's the celebrant of the service at 10 o'clock. And we did that last year, and sometimes people would come to that service and stay, or they would just come to this class or just go to the Eucharist. It doesn't matter. But that's being offered beginning next week, and will be an offering every week. And then in 2 weeks, I'll be back at 10:45 down here for chapter 4 of Romans we're going to look at. Okay? So just kind of a schedule update. Thank you, Nancy. Okay.
Thank you.